Welcome back to our video on building and securing serverless apps using Amplify. This is part 2 in a 3-part series where we're exploring AWS serverless capabilities and sharing our experiences using the Amplify tooling. Just a quick intro, I'm Bobby Pantel and I'll be joined by my colleague Sudhindra Shetty. And just to recap where we are, in the first video we set up the Amplify project in AWS, and in the console we set up our local tooling, including the CLI. We had an Angular front-end app, and we were able to host it in AWS Cloud using the Amplify tools. And finally, we built a CI/CD pipeline that automates our front-end and back-end deployments. We're front-end only now, but we'll be adding the back-end in this video. So just a little bit more about this series. We are in part 2, where we're adding a back-end authentication and storage. We've already created the front-end only app, as we mentioned. And at the end of this particular video, our test front-end app will include login capabilities, including a screen and back-end authentication using Cognito, and we'll be also preparing for data storage in subsequent videos. Just a repeat of our app, it's a campaign management app, just a very quick test tool. And our expectation is you would have your own front-end app ready that you can use. We're also putting our code on GitHub, which you can see the URL here. And this particular video starts at tag we mentioned, the tag that we mentioned here too. So you can follow along. This is a diagram of our target architecture that we're working towards throughout this series of videos. As you can see, Amplify CLI supports many aspects of the application, including the aspects that you see at the top here. In this particular video, we have highlighted auth and storage as our target aspects. And this would include, under auth, you have Amazon Cognito, an IAM, which secures your entire infrastructure. And storage for storage, we use Amazon DynamoDB. Now, the API and functions will sort of be our middle layer, which connects everything and completes the end-to-end solution. And that's what we'll get to in part 3. But for now, auth and storage is what we'll work on. Okay, now I'm gonna pass it over to Sudhindra. He's gonna walk through the code. So Sudhindra, take it away.
Thank you, Bobby. Let's talk more about the code now, where we will be talking more about authentication, authorization, and preparing for our data storage. As you saw in the last video, we successfully deployed our front-end application into the cloud using Amplify hosting, and you can see here that we have a front-end environment and a backend environment with no resources created so far. In this video, we're going to focus on creating 2 backend resources. So one is the authentication, and the other is DynamoDB storage. So the authentication is basically using Cognito user pool. So let's get into creating an auth for our application. So the command for that is amplify add auth, and this is gonna give me a couple of options to create the authentication for our app using Cognito. I'm gonna stick with the default configuration because that is something is gonna be helpful for rapidly developing a web application, and it's gonna satisfy all the requirements that is needed for our app. So the second option is using the default configuration with social provider is basically if you have any external third-party authentication providers like Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, you can set up your identity pools to basically integrate with a third-party provider. So I'm just going to stick with the first one in this case. These are the fields that the users will be required to sign in, and I'm going to be using email for a demo. And I'm not going to configure any advanced settings because I don't need to for rapidly developing applications. I'm just gonna stick with the first option. So it's gonna start creating or provisioning those resources locally, and you can see here the auth resource was created locally successfully. I'm gonna push this to the cloud. So the command for that is amplify push, and it's gonna verify the status locally before it pushes the resources in the cloud. Should come back in a moment and give me a status of what is actually getting created. And you can see here the auth in this case is created. The Amplify hosting was already created before. So I'm just gonna continue. And it's gonna start like provisioning the resources in the cloud. And we can always verify that using the CloudFormation service right here. As you can see here, this is our root stack, and the resources that are getting created in this case, right? So you can see here the auth resource is getting created. So the stack is basically in progress. And you can always go inside that particular resource and see the details. And you can see all these the different user pools. So we are going to creating a user pool. There's a user client, user pool client role getting created, which is tied to that. There's a user pool client created, and there's an SNS role, which is basically used for sending email notifications in this case. So let's wait for that to get completed. Um, you can also get a lot of other information under the stack. All right, looks like the resources were successfully created in the cloud, and you can go back to the app to confirm the same. So let's go there. Just gonna hit refresh here. You can see here the authentication resource was added, and once you go in there, you can see the user pool that was created as part of the authentication, and you can view that in the Cognito service. And this is the a user pool that was created, and it's basically using the default configuration, and the required attributes were email in this case. So I'm gonna stick with that. So let's go back into our application and try to integrate with the Cognito user pool that was created. So I have already created the login screen here, which basically uses the Amplify Authenticator templates. And in this case, we are using Angular, but you can find these templates for different like JavaScript frameworks like React, Vue, Ionic, and some others. And you can find the details of that under the Amplify documentation. That's already available. So let's go and try to integrate the login screen. So before that, we need to make sure that the authentication uh, configuration that was created locally is basically applied on the client side. So we need to basically import those packages and apply it uh, in an application. So that's part of our main.ts in an Angular. So I'm going to uncomment this code. This is basically importing all the Amplify and auth related packages from AWS Amplify, and it's gonna apply those configuration on the client side. So go and uncomment this. And you can see here is importing the Amplify config from this AWS exports file that gets created as part of the Amplify add-on. And you can see this under, I can just go here. Right here. So you can see the AWS Cognito Identity Pool ID, the region, and the pool ID name, right? So this is what the client side is going to use to authenticate the users and make those requests against the Cognito pool. So that's what is needed.
So Sudindra, so
Yeah.
the user's required to go to import and then also make sure that they plug in their own values to the to those within those parameters, right? The user pool ID. So they've got to plug in their own values
Yes.
here. Okay.
Yes. I mean, if they have if they have something set up like different, because this was auto generated
Okay.
from the Amplify ad hosting, sorry, ad auth itself. So this file gets auto generated as part of the process. So this
Okay.
will pick all the identity, a pool ID, names, and the pool ID values, and it will set it up under this file. But if you make any changes to this file, then it might not work unless you are pointing to some other pool ID. So
Okay. Yeah, it's automatically generated, so avoid making changes to it. All right.
right.
Thanks.
So we already have a login screen. So let's uh, see. We want to make sure that anybody who's not authenticated should not be able to access our application, right? So right now, if you look our application here, and if you refresh our application, they are able to go to the screen where they can see the campaigns and make changes. But we don't want to do that. We want to have a login screen before that. So for that, we need to make sure there is an authentication service and an authguard service created to avoid any such like users who are not authenticated, right? To basically block them from accessing an application. So as you can see here, I've created this auth service, which basically looks at those JWT tokens that will be created uh, as part of the authentication, and that will be stored under the local storage of your browser. And there is an ID token and access token that gets created. The ID token is basically carries the identity of the user who is logged in, and the access token basically carries the permissions or what authorization permission that the user has. So this particular service is going to manage that. And there's an authguard service. As you can see, like anybody who is not authorized to view a certain screen based on the role, they should be navigated back to the login screen and not that and not let them access any other screen that they're not authenticated. So there are two services that's going to help you do that. And to make sure that we add an auth guard to our path, which is basically a campaigns component on the client side. I'm gonna configure that. So it's gonna look for this auth guard. So basically, what this is gonna do is whenever they try to access the default home page of an application, is going to look for this auth guard and check whether the user is authenticated and authorized to access that home screen or not. If they're not authorized, they will be taken back to the login screen. And the default is obviously your login component, which is your login screen. So let's save that. That should trigger changes in your application. And now when you go back here, to your home screen right here. Go to my home screen, but I'm not authenticated, so it will take me to the login screen. And this is the login screen that I was talking about a while back, the template that we used using the Amplify. And I'm gonna, so I don't have a user yet, but I'm gonna try to log in and see if I can log in, right? So it's not gonna let me because say that the user does not exist. So I'm gonna create a new user for myself. This is the email I'm gonna use, and I'm gonna create a password for myself. So what this is gonna do is gonna create a user inside the user pool, and it's gonna send me a verification code to basically verify my email. So I'm gonna wait for that email and pick up the verification code, which I already received now, and I'm gonna paste it here to confirm. And now, once my email is confirmed and the user is authenticated, it's gonna take me to the home screen. And you can see here now under the local storage is where the access tokens and ID tokens will be created, right? Right here. All right, so that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much on the authentication side. Is there anything, Bobby, that you want to add?
Well, no, it's a nice, interesting feature from Amplify that it gives you the login screen and and the sign up functionality just basically out of the box, which you can then configure to meet your specific application. But by putting that login directive in there to use the Amplify login screen, it includes all the functionality that you need, and it communicates properly with the Cognito user pool. So I think that's very helpful head start for someone just that wants to add auth to their application.
Okay, so now we are gonna add storage to our application using Amplify, and the command for that is amplify add storage. So this is gonna give me a couple of options for adding the storage. I'm gonna pick the NoSQL database for our case. It's gonna ask me a friendly name for our app, for our storage, a resource. So I'm gonna say campaign app, and the same name for the table as well. Would like to. So what would you like to name this column? So we're gonna add like columns to a table. I'm gonna add ID to store our campaign IDs, which is of type string. Would you like to add another column? Yes. And I'm going to name this as party to store our party names. So your type string. I don't need to add any more columns right now. If at all you need, you can add that in your object model. So your table will need a partition key to uniquely find the data. I'm gonna pick the ID as a partition key and a sort key. Yes. If you want to filter your data with some other criteria other than the partition key, you can use your sort key for that. So I'm going to use party. And I don't have any other criteria at this moment to filter my data, so I don't need to add any global security indexes. But if you want to explore more on this side, yeah, you can do that. So say no. I don't have any triggers at this moment for my table, so I'll say no for that. All right, so looks like it successfully added the campaign app DynamoDB resource locally. I'm going to publish that to the cloud using Amplify push command. And this will confirm the changes done on my local before it pushes to the cloud. So I'm going to wait for that. I'm going to take a brief moment before it confirms the same. With a moment. All right. So this is going to confirm that we're going to add a storage, which is great. I'm going to say continue yes. And right now it's going to start publishing those resources in the cloud, and you can verify the same under your cloud formation as I showed you before. So if you refresh this, you can see here this is your root stack. The update is in progress. You can see all the resources getting created, and the storage campaign app, which is basically your DynamoDB, that is getting created, and you can always jump into the nested stack for this particular resource, and you can see the details of the resource that's getting created. In this case, it's DynamoDB. So let's wait for it to get completed, and we'll come back to it once it's done. All right. Looks like it's completed, and you can verify the same in your Amplify console. So go under your console app and look at your backend environment. You can see a storage that got created, right? And then here you can see that actually it doesn't show up here. You have to go to the DynamoDB service directly. And go on to tables, and you can see here this is a campaign app, and it's kind of tagged with your dev environment, which is nice. So if you have different environments like maintained, you can easily find out to which environment does it belong. And right now, if you see here, this is a partition key and the sort key, and that's it. Our storage is created using Amplify.
So here are some key takeaways for this video. The first is that you can integrate with other external identity providers than just Cognito. You can integrate with Google, Facebook, Apple, any OpenID providers. So you're not just limited to what we did, which was Cognito. The next is that as you integrate your front end with the AWS SDK and Amplify libraries, you may get JavaScript code errors. We've received globals not defined and buffers not defined errors. This is well documented in the tutorials online and in Stack Overflow, but what we had to do was just update our polyfills TS and index.html, which you saw in the video, and you can see our changes in the code. We use Angular 11, so newer versions might fix this issue. It's also important to pay attention to the billing mode for DynamoDB tables. The Amplify, when it creates the CloudFormation templates for a table, the default billing mode is provisioned, so you'll be paying for a table even if it's not being used. Pay per request billing mode might be a better setting for your use case if you're doing a proof of concept or when you're just starting out. However, pay per request is on demand, so the cost could spike as you develop your app more and you get more usage of it. So as your app becomes more established, you can change it to provision capacity. It just depends on where you are in your application. So the point is just pay attention to that billing mode because it could cost you down the road. The billing mode for a table can only be changed once every 24 hours, so make sure you're aware of that. And one more thing about DynamoDB tables, if you're using global secondary indexes, you can't modify more than one global secondary index in a single stack deployment. So that you might have to spread out your changes to global secondary indexes across updates. Final takeaway is that the Amplify provides a nice login and sign up screen, but you can always customize that template. You can customize the look and feel and the available fields on those screens. So that's it for this video. In our third and final video in the series, we'll be adding an API and functions to complete the backend layer, which will give us a full end-to-end serverless application. And we'll be implementing the appropriate security policies to protect those backend resources. So thanks for joining us, and hope to see you in the next video.